One of the greatest written fights in all of manga history is Higuruma vs Yuji. This is not something I say lightly. This isn't something I say because I'm a fan of Jujutsu Kaisen. For context, I've been watching anime since I was 5 years old, and I've been reading manga since I was 7 years old, and I am currently 25 years old, meaning it has been 20 years since I've been watching anime, 18 years since I've been reading manga, consistently buying manga as a child. And I have read all sorts of stories, but particularly this fight of Higuruma vs Yuji stands out to me as just being a masterclass of writing, truly an emotional roller coaster, the themes of the fight being wonderful and it just having such a strong impact on the reader, the character depth, the emotions that all the character has, the sheer flavor from the pages. I confidently say that this is by far the greatest fight GEGE has ever written, and I don't think he will ever write something even close to this. I think it is truly his masterpiece, and amongst all of manga, and I don't say that lightly, this is truly one of the best fights I have ever read, and I have taken time with that opinion. I've sat with this opinion since this came out many years ago, since I actually read these chapters week to week as they've been coming out, since I've been reading JJK every week since chapter 1 first came out. And today I'll share with you the greatness of Yuji vs Higuruma. Now that it has an anime release, I imagine many of you may have only watched the anime's version, so I'll share with you the manga's version of it, which actually does include even some parts that were cut from the anime itself, but overall I think both are a fantastic experience, especially the anime. The anime is phenomenally great with how they're portraying this fight. The animation and art is beautiful, Mappa's doing a wonderful job, but just in particular I wanted to share the version that truly captivated me. I remember reading this every week as each one of these chapters came out. Each week I would reread the chapter I think 10 or 15 times, just again and again, just waiting for the next one because it was just that good. I remember being on the bus, on the train, reading this again and again when it came out weekly. It was just that good, and honest to God, it just connected with me in such a strong way. I just cannot wait to start talking about the greatest fight in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, dare I even say in manga history, Yuji vs Higuruma.
全員戻れ。やり直しだ。
Now to start off with, we will start with chapter 159. Now this is going to be a very interesting part, but we are not going to start with the fight itself, as that's actually a couple chapters after this, but we will start specifically with Higuruma's backstory, because that actually is a lot of context for the fight itself that happens with Yuji, and I do think this is incredibly interesting. Of course, I will have timestamps for everything included, so if you do want to skip this part, which I don't recommend, I think this is very great writing. I really enjoy it showing Higuruma's personality, his character coming out very strongly in this, and it also gives the backdrop of context of why Higuruma makes his final decision that he does against Yuji. It actually all comes from this moment, because this is what helps you understand who Higuruma is, why he does what he does, why he's a lawyer, why he wants to keep his eyes open for the eyes of justice. But if not, you're more than welcome to just skip straight to the fight. That is your choice. I mean, hey, you're free to do what you want. So to start with, we have the first page of chapter 159. In Japan, 99.9% of criminal trials end in a guilty verdict, and we get the backstory of this young man who Higuruma is defending. To basically sum it up, he was just confronted by the police, and he didn't want them to arrest him because he had a cat, and if they arrest him, his cat would die, and it's against the rules of where he lives. Locally, a mother and a young daughter were stabbed to death, so police officers were asking around when they just asked by chance a resident called Kite Oe, and because Kite ran, because of that they found where he lived, and they actually found the knife which had the DNA blood of the murdered daughter and mother. But Kite is crying as he says, "It picked it up, it wasn't mine." Now back to Higuruma's office, we have the girl that Higuruma is working with. Often you see a lot of people are saying they're flirting, especially in the current anime. It's very cute. She's a good character, actually. She does appear at the end of Jujutsu Kaisen, interestingly enough, so she doesn't just appear now. She is very relevant for the ending of Higuruma's own character. She says, "Give me a break," and everything just matches against it. He fled the interrogation because he was guilty, right? And the authorities once questioned him illegally because he had a friend who used drugs. So they're thinking maybe it's trauma. And then she even says the impossibility of the situation, so he just happened to pick up a bloody knife. Higuruma says the defendant claims he planned to give it to the police later, and she's pretty shocked. I mean, as most of you probably are. She says, "Later?" As Higuruma says, "I know, his reasons defy belief." Now this is where Higuruma's true personality comes in. He says, "But there's his circumstances. When I considered how he worked a live-in job for a non-profit, it isn't implausible." So basically, this guy, Kite Oe, who was actually captured, worked for a shelter, and he supported older people who had no place to go. And they didn't even pay wages there, so he was basically doing it out of the goodness of his heart. And even while he did that, they still forced him to pay 50,000 yen every month in rent while he wasn't getting paid. And not only that, but in the area, quite a lot of the residents have a record, and as for why he didn't turn in the weapon, we actually get to hear Oe's own opinion. He says, You can't call the police or an ambulance, it's a rule, because it'll bother all the neighbors. And Higuruma says it's possible that truly is innocent. And then you see Higuruma goes to get into the work. First, we look into the non-profits activities and the taxes. I'll ask around about Oe, Shimizu, you handle the rest. And she says, Higuruma, why did you take the case, as she's thinking about how complicated and a lot of work this is going to be over somebody who probably is going to be charged as guilty because there is a 99% death verdict in Japan. Or I guess I should say guilty verdict specifically. She says, why did you take the case, Mr. Higuruma? And he says it's alright to take these cases sometimes. Easy work dulls one's skills. She thinks it isn't sometimes, as she shouts, it isn't sometimes, and Higuruma says, you're thinking out loud. Shimizu actually meets Higuruma's old colleague and friend, and they're meeting in a cafe as she laughs. Higuruma never changes. It's awful when your boss isn't interested in money, but it's not so awful that I have to start a cafe on the side like you, Tagaki. She questions, you said he never changed. Was he always like that? Well actually, he may have gotten worse, is what the former colleague Tagaki says. And Shimizu says, huh? Tagaki says, when he was at my office, he handled a case involving reckless driving, specifically drunk driving. The defendant was 19. His workplace forced him to drive drunk, and everyone agreed to tell the same story. He couldn't pay to settle, nor could he get a probation. And then we see a flashback of this defendant, 19-year-old, crying, saying, liar, you said they'd find me innocent. And then we see in the flashback that Tagaki actually is talking to a much younger Higuruma now, probably one of his first ever cases, as she says, look at the way he treated you. Even though you said they'd never find him innocent, only that his sentence could be suspended. Now have you learned your lesson? Being a criminal lawyer just isn't well. Saving the weak and powerless is admirable, but what can we do against court cases and prosecutors? Why keep going even when our clients despise us? Higuruma says they're just up against a wall, financially and emotionally, so they take it out on us. But what about your state, Higuruma? And before we get to hear the end of that, we actually get to see some work. So Higuruma's studying quite a lot. Even him and Shizumi are very tired, sleeping around, and they're asking locals around trying to get information, and then we see it cuts to the future. The court finds the defendant innocent, as everyone's murmuring. And she says, we actually won, not yet, and we get the infamous meme panel. They'll appeal immediately as Higuruma has his hands on his face. And we can see all over social media, people are saying the court was bought, and how much did they offer, the law is dead, mockery gets killers off, which is ironic because he actually is innocent, but everyone's just assuming he's guilty, and even they're looking at Higuruma different. Something that I like that the anime added, you can see in the manga, the citizens are actually looking at Higuruma, recognizing him. In the anime itself, we have citizens taking pictures of him when he's not even noticing on the train, which I thought was a very neat touch. Like I said, the anime has done a wonderful adaptation of this fight. And he says, thank you so much, Higuruma. Oh, so much. And he says, anyway, there'll be a second trial. And he says, no, I don't mean that. He says, thank you for believing it. And this is where things get very sad. There was an appeal hearing, a second trial, and the verdict was guilty, life imprisonment. While independent defense lawyers rely on limited funding and small staffs, public prosecutors have access to tax money and manpower in gathering evidence. That's to be expected because it's simply the way the system works, but prosecutors failed to provide new evidence at the second trial. The court passed the sentence based on the shoddy argument that there was no reason to suspect the missing person, thereby overturning the previous ruling. A third trial before the highest court is unlikely because it refuses to hear most cases. Even getting a fair hearing is improbable. The system branded him guilty from the very start. Now this is the most crazy part. Before the second trial even started, they already lost. They just deemed that he was guilty. There was nothing that could have been done, and this is where we see the incredible shot that GEGE drew of the raw emotion as he looks at Higuruma in the same way, almost like they blame him. And we see Higuruma's reaction to this as he thinks, why do they look at me? And then we flash back to the end of the conversation that he had of Tadaku. She asks, what about your mental state, Higuruma? He says, I'm not trying to save the weak and powerless. Ever since I was a kid. Actually, now that I say that, it reminds me of that meme. Ever since I was a kid. But anyway, just to continue, sorry, this is a serious video. I couldn't leave things alone. If something wasn't right, and that hasn't changed. Lady Justice wears a blindfold to represent the laws impartially, and people choose to open their eyes to spare themselves the truth. But even so, in order to not shake off the hands that cling to me, even if I'm the only one, I want to keep my eyes open. As we see a beautiful moment, the judges say if the objections to this decision, you must petition for a final appeal within 15 days. As a bang suddenly appears, Higuruma manifests a gavel out of nowhere, with the executioner sword right on it there, as everyone's shocked as he repeatedly keeps banging it, and she thinks Shimizumi, Mr. Higuruma. Everyone come back. We're having a retry. Hiromi Higuruma, culling game player. What a marvelous introduction and a beautiful end to chapter 159.
全員戻れ。やり直しだ。ガセだな。 死滅回遊が永続を歌っている。
気持ちがいいぞ。
Now, the next moment actually is 4 chapters later, halfway through chapter 163. The anime actually rearranged the order of things, so that's why it may seem strange, because if you watch the anime, they actually just mixed it all together, which I think was a good decision, honestly. But we see Higuruma is in a bathtub, and Yuji thinks, a bathtub? Higuruma asks, who are you, and what are you doing? Yuji says the same to you. Higuruma says, have you ever taken a bath in your clothes? Nope. And I will say, the art style for this particular fight, and just honestly this moment in the culling game, actually is GEGE at his best. I think during Shinjuku and even Shibuya or pre-Shibuya, the art style does tend to change quite heavily, but there is a point during the culling games when there is a consistent culling games art style, and I actually think this is probably GEGE at his best, and the Higuruma fight is just drawn masterfully. Every expression by every character, you can see the detail, the emotion, the depth, the meaning that has behind every single character. It is just beautifully drawn. To continue, Higuruma answers, it feels better than I expected. Oh right, when I was in elementary school, I liked swimming classes where we had clothes, and Yuji thinks I know what you mean. These days, I don't care about much, so I'm challenging myself to do things I previously thought I should. So basically, I went off the rails in my 30s. Do you find that funny? As Higuruma splashes around and Yuji says, yeah I do. You're Higuruma, right? In the flesh. I want to talk. No wait, not so fast. I'm a lawyer, so talking to me costs 5,000 yen every half hour. Yuji thinks, as Higuruma begins to laugh to himself, saying, I'm joking, I just wanted to play the money-grubbing lawyer for a change. And Yuji thinks, there's something weird about this guy. You scored 100 points, right? He asks. Yuji keeps thinking, he isn't an incarnated sorcerer. He's a modern-day sorcerer whose curse technique has awakened. That means he'll listen to me. We can make a deal. Yuji says, to be blunt, I want to put an end to the culling. Rather, we want to negate the forced killing. But Higuruma doesn't do that. And Yuji has a dark and grim expression on his face, saying, is that a joke too? Higuruma says, no. The culling game presents possibilities. Sometimes the law is powerless. Ironic considering what his technique is, right? Where the law gives him his powers. It's a very funny twist. And actually, one thing I want to say, when the Judge Man manifests and during the whole Yuji fight, Higuruma says he wants to actually not have the blindfold of justice like the Lady of Justice always has. But his domain expansion, who is actually Judge Man, always has her eyes closed, while Higuruma has his own open, which you'll see at the end is actually, it's the reason he didn't beat Yuji is because he keeps his eyes open, which he then proceeds to close later on. Honestly, there is even more to it after this fight where he cannot look Yuji in the face, but I will save all of that for the end. But now we are still reading the fight. I'm getting way too ahead of myself. Higuruma continues saying, but what about the culling games? If the power I have received is real, then so are the rules. What if rule breakers got punished according to natural law without any charges, prosecutions, or trials? Wouldn't that be wonderful? I recognize the rules aren't perfect, but I want to preserve the culling game's basic mechanics, so I don't want it to end so soon. Especially when it comes to rules 2 and 8, I'd like to see curse technique removal at least once. As Shoko says, that means you'll die. Yuji says, that's part of the culling game ritual. If we wait too long, everyone in this country will die. As Higuruma says, I doubt it, the culling game celebrates permanence, meaning it just wants to last forever. Yuji says, I don't really get that part either, and he says, let me rephrase. Let me use your 100 points, Higuruma, as Higuruma steps off the bathtub and he says, have you ever killed someone who ticks you off? It feels better than I expected.
領域展開中腹獅子
Now we have chapter 164 as the fight finally begins to get wet. A Shikigami is summoned and Yuji thinks, a Shikigami. Higuruma holds 100 points. He may have killed 20 sorcerers. So instead of charging, I'll start on the defensive. But I'll be ready for any attack as Yuji waits. And then right off the bat, Higuruma starts with his strongest technique, domain expansion, deadly sentence. Yuji tries to attack quickly before the show activates, as he thinks a domain. Before he can activate his curse technique, I gotta take him out. But his attack is actually stopped. The domain forbids the use of violence for both of us, and Yuji gets teleported back on stand. I'm back where I started. Yes, but verbal violence is another matter. Judgment, please begin. Yuji Itadori lies under suspicion of entering the Maji Vegas pachinko parlor on July 16, 2017 in Sendai, Miyagi Prefecture, despite being under the age of 18 years at the time. He says, huh? Oh, and Yuji actually remembers he was there. And this is the funniest part. 68 years later, 68 whole years, and when Yuji is a 86-year-old immortal in JJK Modulo, he actually still regularly visits pachinko parlors to gamble the same way he did when he was a teenager. And actually some even more funny information, but in that moment when he meets Megumi and Nobara, when that girl Ozawa actually met Yuji for the first time in season 1, he was actually out gambling in the pachinko parlor once again. So Yuji's got a gambling addict that even as a near 90-year-old, he still keeps an immortal 90-year-old. But just to continue, Yuji thinks, no wait, and Higuruma says, Judge Man knows everything about everyone inside the domain, but don't worry, I don't have that information. The verdict depends solely upon the arguments you and I present, and this evidence. Judge Man has submitted this for deliberation. The evidence is not necessarily conclusive, and you will not be told what's inside. You must state your case to dispel all doubt and thereby win a pronouncement of innocence from Judge Man. If this technique for trials, he's wearing a badge, he's a real lawyer, Yuji realizes, and he's prosecuted. Higuruma is a modern man, but this domain reminds me of something Master Tengen said. As we get a flashback to Tengen, domains used to be more of a common technique for sorcerers of the past. The reason is that many domains now involve deadly can't miss attacks, but they weren't always this way. They merely forced targets inside to obey curse techniques rules. That was how most domains function. Constructing a lethal domain isn't normal, but making a domain that isn't meant to be lethal is more common. That's basically the way to sum it up, and I'll even read it here. Constructing a domain that is meant to be lethal requires immense skill, so the number of users decrease. That means this domain isn't necessarily fatal and can't physically harm. Plus, it relies on a binding vow that requires an explanation of the rules. You have one chance to make a statement, as do I. After your statement, I'll offer a rebuttal based on this evidence. Judge Man will deliver a lawful verdict. What happens if he says I'm guilty? Sorry, but I don't have the answer. But I will tell you this instead. You have 3 options: silence, confession, denial. A denial may include false statements. Yuji says, because he's just so innocent, he's a teenager, so I can lie in court? And Higuruma says if everyone told the truth, there'd be no need for trial. You can see Yuji's innocence coming through. Begin your defense. Judge Man isn't very patient. Yuji begins to think to himself, I really did go to the pachinko parlor and play machines. I think I even won. So lying isn't the only way. The problem is I don't know what says in the evidence. The evidence is not necessarily conclusive. Either option 1, if the evidence doesn't provide or prove that I entered the pachinko parlor, I just need to stay silent and deny it. Evidence, or option 2, if the evidence only proves that I entered the parlor, then I can say it was for another reason. I had to use the jon, which is the bathroom. But if the evidence is 1, wouldn't that be admitting that I went in, thereby digging my own grave? If the evidence proves that I not only went in, but I played, but I'm basically screwed, that's option 3. I could try confessing in the hopes of a lighter sentence, but does this court even have that kind of thing? Yuji thinks, and he made his choice. Yes, I went to pachinko parlor, so he went of option 2, but only to take a dump. I refuse to choose option 3. I don't know if I can plead extenuating circumstances here, but I think that'll make the best impression. Higuruma says, oh, is that so? Now it's my turn. This is an image from a security camera at the cash exchange window near Magi Vegas on the day in question. Does this individual exhibit the appearance and build of the accused? Pairing this photo with his own admission of entering the premises casts his story of the restroom in doubt. It is certain that despite being underage, he entered with the intent of playing machines. Yuji asks, so what am I guilty of? The establishment expressly forbids entry to minors, so unlawful entry. After all, laws specifically for establishments don't allow punishing minors. That's not fair, Yuji thinks, so I should have chosen 3. There's nothing I could have said. This is where Higuruma says something interesting about the Japanese law system. On the contrary, Japan forbids gambling, so parlors and cash exchange are separate legal entities. In some cases, multiple parlors share one exchange, but you're only on trial for the parlor. You just needed to deny it, saying, I've never seen that pachinko parlor before. Now for the verdict. Guilty. Confiscation. Yuji thinks I'm out of the domain, but Judge Man found me guilty. I don't feel any different, as Yuji gets hit by Higuruma throwing his hammer at him that rips his clone apart. Higuruma teleports the gavel right back into his hand and even increases the size and smashes Yuji by the side. The gavel, he can make it disappear and reappear and can even change its size. But what's worse is, as Higuruma thinks, you're tough. I can't control my cursed energy, and Yuji thinks, yeah, that's one thing I got going for. And that is the end for chapter 164, with 165 starting now. As this chapter, and especially the next chapter, are going to be the most beautiful, and where the fantastic writing truly kicks in, with everything so far already being phenomenal. Hiromi Higuruma, 36, a bar associate and legal apprenticeship period 59. He readily overcame such challenges as the entry exam for the law department at university and the old national bar exam that preceded the law system. It was very easy for him. It was simply a matter of applying the necessary effort to acquire the required knowledge. His peers referred to him as a genius, which is very funny because that's the same line that the editor says as Higuruma is fighting Sukuna during the Shinjuku Showdown. But what stands out about him the most, and we'll get a continuation of this in the next few pages as Higuruma goes to fight Yuji, as he keeps trying to basically slam him, as Yuji just keeps trying to dodge and eventually gets flipped around. And the narrative continues, is his talent as a sorcerer, basically saying Higuruma is one of the greatest talents of a lawyer in all of history, Japan's history specifically, and his talent as a sorcerer surpasses even that of his talent as a lawyer. And that makes sense when you consider he's been a sorcerer for only 12 days. I remind you, he awakened his technique within 12 days and he reached grade 1 level, like super high tier grade 1 level. All of this through self-learning, like he's never been taught anything. And he defeated 20 sorcerers before that. What's even crazier is later on during the Sukuna fight, we find out that he actually has the same level of talent as Gojo, which even shocks Sukuna himself. Now, I won't say much more just in case people haven't read the Shinjuku Shutdown fight, but it is very important and it's connected to this moment specifically. And actually the narrator basically just repeats everything I said, and I'll read it for you. Through analyzing the curse technique that came by default with his domain, he learned the basics of barrier techniques. Then by working backward from barrier techniques, he acquired an instinctive grasp of reinforcement techniques derived from cursed energy control. Within 12 days of awakening his technique, Higuruma reached a level comparable to a grade 1 sorcerer. Before entering the colony, he defeated many cursed spirits and defeated at least 20 players who attacked. Higuruma questions, can't you use your cursed energy? Thanks to you, Yuji says, I can't. Higuruma says the penalty for confiscation temporarily makes it impossible to use cursed techniques, but I suspect you don't have one, and Yuji thinks no comment. And Higuruma thinks, what a frightening thing to think about, as he says, so the effect must have switched from preventing cursed energy use, and Higuruma thinks, how can he stand against me without cursed energy? Higuruma says confiscation is usually an additional punishment accompanying another punishment, foreshadowing the death penalty. And Higuruma thinks it's because of his physical prowess. His raw strength must be immense. And this is actually something we know, that Yuji at a base in his raw strength is actually semi-grade 1 level, just like Maki is, which would explain how when you give him cursed energy, he's extremely high tier grade 1. But yes, even though Yuji is semi-grade 1 level, the same strength as Maki, pre-awakening of course, it does make sense why Higuruma is completely overwhelming him, because Higuruma is a high tier grade 1 and a genius at that. There's a huge gap between semi-grade 1 sorcerers like how strong Nobara was, Inumaki, Maki, and characters like Naname and now Bito. As even Nobara, who's definitely at least semi-grade 1 level bare minimum, thought to herself, wow, a grade 1 sorcerer is very strong. To continue from Higuruma's thoughts, when sorcerers lose the ability to wield cursed techniques, usually their foundational cursed energy control also weakens, maybe because it goes against long-ingrained instincts. A complete inability to wield cursed energy is even more disadvantageous, yet he has lasted this long, when a single blow would be enough to defeat the average opponent. By the way, that's pretty nuts. Like, Higuruma is so strong, he defeats other semi-grade 1 or grade 2 sorcerers in a single blow when the cursed energy gets shaky, whereas Yuji, even with just his base strength without cursed energy, is outlasting semi-grade 1 and grade 1 sorcerers. Or grade 2 sorcerers, I should say. Because he did say the average opponent. I imagine the grade 1 sorcerers Higuruma had probably weren't average level. Let's say Reggie Star, who's extremely high tier grade 1. But just to continue, he thinks if I'm not careful, he'll trip me up, so I'll crush him with my full might. Higuruma begins to throw a flurry of hammer swings as Yuji dodges them all and tries to grab the gavel and use it against him, but Higuruma simply makes it vanish, and Higuruma gets it back in his right hand as Yuji kicks the bathtub and Higuruma smashes it, using the water's cover to actually try and strike Yuji, making his gavel huge as Yuji is being overwhelmed. Higuruma thinks, incredible, it's like I'm fighting an unbreakable dog, which is mad props. Again, Higuruma with a cursed tool being strong high tier grade 1 and Yuji's actually surviving, which does make sense since we even got lines from Shoso that Yuji was actually getting stronger, perhaps due to the Sukuna fingers inside him, which of course makes sense as we find out that Kinjaku actually sealed a Sukuna finger inside of Yuji at birth, which explains his incredible strength that he always has. Yuji thinks, oh no, this is bad, as he says no many times. You can see the panic on his face. How long can I last? I need my cursed energy back and fast. He's so powerful, but that means there must be some compensatory weakness, right? Think. His cursed technique is court trials. Court trials, as Yuji screams, Higuruma, I want a retrial. As we go back all the way to the domain, Yuji figuring out the retrial, which is interesting because they actually use this retrial gimmick to try to defeat Sukuna. Higuruma thinks, starting to get it, huh? That was close, Yuji thinks. I get a second trial, right? Judgeman was the one who declared me guilty and sentenced me. If I don't admit my guilt, I can request a retrial, and Judgeman can't refuse. He says, I demand a do-over, as Judgeman, in the most chilling page turn yet, says Itadori Yuji stands accused of mass murder in Shibuya on October 31, 2018. And well and truly, this was the moment this fight just truly went into a completely different realm of writing. I mean, the art, the writing itself, the characters, the intense emotions and feeling coming off each and every single panel, not even the page itself, is remarkably fantastic. This is where this fight gets elevated to one of the greatest of all time, as we see Yuji's shocked expression as Judgman calmly recounts this moment from Yuji, that Yuji even tried to take his own life for, that he does blame himself. And as Yuji is completely stunned, we see in the next page a beautiful page of Yuji's own innocence, even for a crime he didn't commit. Yuji says, "Yeah, I did it. I'm not lying and I won't deny." And even as I read this, God, the emotions still stir up inside of me as I look at this page, as I see Higuruma's reaction and Judge Man's anger as Higuruma's shocked with Yuji saying this, with the pure innocence of Yuji taking responsibility for something that Sukuna did. Honest to God, one of the greatest pages in all of manga, and I cannot wait to actually watch this animated in the anime itself. But my God, like, you can just see the page, the lines that Yuji is saying, and the build up from Shibuya itself, and the character of Yuji where he always takes blame for everything and he blames himself, the self-hatred of Yuji that actually led to Sukuna being freed and taking Megami's body, it coming through and shining in this moment. One of the greatest moments in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, as Higuruma again is stunned by this. He doesn't understand why Yuji confessed to something he didn't do, as Judge Man is enraged in the next page. Guilty, confiscation, death penalty, as Yuji looks intense getting ready for the death penalty, as we see to be continued, and it will be continued in the next chapter 166. Now we see a flashback of Higuruma when he's much younger. Mr. Higuruma, if this is about the proposal, Higuruma says, I submitted it early. The professor says, no, it's not about that. Your proposal looks great. So good it can be used for an actual sentence. You want to be a public prosecutor on defense lawyer, right? And he says, are you sure? How about trying to become a judge? As he says that, we see in the next page, Judge Man is right behind Higuruma, enraged, looking absolutely intense and terrifying. Guilty, death penalty, confiscation. And then we see in the next page, or even before that, Higuruma looks stunned. He even looks disgusted, as the Judge Man has an opposite expression, because the Judge Man is blind to all of this, as the eyes are still stitched. It's just screaming, guilty, confiscation, death penalty, which parallels exactly with how the real life people judged Hite away. If you remember on social media, everyone says, oh, he's a murderer, how can he go free? He's guilty. In the same way, Judge Man is a representation of that, but Higuruma is the only one whose eyes are open, as he looks disgusted by this, because this stands against everything he's been doing all his life as a public defender, as his gavel turns into the executioner's sword. The harshest sentence Judge Man can give is the death penalty with confiscation. First, confiscation removes the ability to use a curse technique, cursed energy in Itadori Yuji's case. Then Higuruma receives the executioner's sword. Without an exception, anyone cut by the executioner's sword will die. And one of the beautiful, most stunning artistic writing right here, the symbolism with Yuji being in the light, and on the right side Higuruma is in the dark. This has got to be one of the most artistically simple yet utterly beautiful pages I have read. Like, mangaka always are creative and they do these crazy cute things, right? Very creative aspects, but this with the context involved, with the light of Yuji and the darkness that Higuruma has fallen into, even with their own clothing where Yuji's wearing more lighter clothes, Higuruma being pitch black, as the executioner's sword is the bridge between the light and the dark. It is just a stunning page in terms of artistic symbolism and writing. GEGE truly a masterclass moment, and the next page even more so, getting into the mindset of Higuruma as he thinks to himself, to empathize with human emotions means to understand their weakness, the weakness of the victim, the weakness of the accused. Day after day after day, I was fed up with it. Ugly. That's what I thought every time I tried to help another person. As Higuruma loses it, he begins to say, and that includes you, Itadori. All people are ugly and weak. No matter how high-minded a soul you inspire to, you can see just how much the system has broken this once innocent man with a pure reasoning, a man who just tried to defend the innocent, how much it cracked him, destroyed him. As Yuji looks intense, Yuji doesn't even answer. In the next page, there's nothing more to it. The darkness before your eyes is just darkness. Even if you shine a light, all you see is more emptiness before you. This is nuts. Like, this has got to be one of the craziest pages. As Higuruma shouts, you can see the raw emotion coming off of him. Just again, insanely great artwork from GEGE. Honest to God, out of any time I've read from GEGE, any art I've ever read, I have never seen characters pop more emotion come out of a character in such detail as it came out from this Higuruma fight. And this line even symbolizes what was said before. It references, as Higuruma was saying, there's just darkness before your eyes, just darkness. Even if you shine a light, it's all empty. As we go back to the previous page, Higuruma's perspective in life is all dark, while Yuji is that light. Yuji goes and he throws a bunch of chairs to try and distract Higuruma, and he actually uses his own shirt as the distraction as he goes in from behind, and even using his undershirt to distract Higuruma once again, trying to sweep him from the legs. Higuruma jumps, dodges it, and before he actually executes Yuji himself, it cuts back to Higuruma talking with his professor saying, sorry, I can't become a judge. Oh, may I ask why? Higuruma, we can see all the way back then he was thinking, people are ugly and weak. He says, I'm not cut out for it, not ambitious enough, and we know that's not true because of Higuruma's own dilemmas as a person. And Higuruma says, until that point, at the very least, I thought I should value that depravity, as Higuruma looks at Yuji as he thinks, what other animals don't have? Why? Itadori Yuji, why did you confess to the crime? The information Judge Man submits as evidence is shared with the sorcerer himself before opening it. The evidence submitted was about the demon inside of you, about Ryomen, Sukuna. As we see in the next page, you want the one who killed them. So why? Why? As we see the light in Yuji's eyes, and finally, Higuruma actually closes his eyes, and this will be the last time he actually looks at Higuruma in the eyes until all the way in Shinjuku, until a very long time later, as he deactivates the technique, seeing the beautiful, just the stunning page of Yuji with the light in his eyes. Higuruma, just like Lady Justice, closes his eyes to it, deactivates his technique, and tanks the punch from Yuji. As he goes flying, coughing up blood, Yuji says, what? Hey, and Higuruma says, Article 39, Clause 1 of the Penal Code. The absence of reason and or control signifies non-compos mentis. So I'm guessing this is law lingual. Sukuna possessed your body in Shibuya. Yuji says, how do you know about? And Higuruma cuts him off. In other words, you couldn't control yourself, and you didn't abandon self-control voluntarily, so you're innocent. You didn't commit that crime. Yuji thinks, even so, it's my fault because I am too weak. And Higuruma remembers what he said before, that he should share that depravity that other people have, the weakness that other people have, as he thinks to himself, I see. Higuruma, why did you dispel your technique? Yuji thinks, or asks him. Higuruma says, I remembered why I got into law into the first place. Itadori, there may still be lots of people who are weak like you. Put your clothes on and sit down. I'll give you the 100 points. And this is the most interesting thing. From this point on, this page that you can see where Yuji's saying my hoodie is here, Higuruma will never look at Itadori ever again, and I'll share manga spoilers after this, but don't worry, I will specifically say before I give those major manga spoilers, for a warning for people who are anime onlys. But Yuji thinks, my hoodie, there it is, Itadori. Have you ever killed someone of your own will? As Higuruma looks down in this beautiful shot of Higuruma and Yuji saying opposite, side by side, Yuji thinks, yes. Higuruma says, I see, didn't it feel off? And then we have chapter 167, the conclusion to this, not the end of the video, there's much more to talk about. But he says, Kogane, add a rule. Make it possible to transfer points between players. This will of course affect the calculation of scores for Rule 8, and the rule is approved. Kogane, give one of my points to Itadori. Higuruma transferred one of his points, and he says, now neither of us will be subject to technique removal for 19 days. Goodbye. As he walks away, now again, just keep noticing, Higuruma doesn't look at Yuji at any of these panels. Yuji says, Higuruma, what are you going to do now? If you don't mind, will you help us? Higuruma says, my 2 leftover points are from the judge and prosecutor I killed before coming to Tokyo. When the barrier opens, I'll turn myself in. Until then, I'll ponder my course of action. Besides, if I stay with you, I'll just hate myself more. What fantastic writing from JJK AKUTAMI. As he says, sorry, I wasn't criticizing you. See you later, as Yuji looks very sad. Now, from this point on, I will be talking about chapter 246. Don't worry, it's no spoilers for what's happening there, but it will contain some spoilers, so be careful. Actually, it's going to contain a lot of spoilers as I just reread everything before I started reading it. It's got quite a lot, so if you're a manga only, this is specifically for you, but if you're anime only, thank you so much for watching this far. Don't want to ruin you on anything what's going to happen next. But to continue, chapter 246, as we see the terrifying shot of Sukuna approaching Higuruma, slashing the building up. Yuji says, Higuruma's curse technique may be effective in saving Fushiguro. Will you tell us about your technique? It's personal info, and Higuruma says, yes, of course, and note this, Higuruma doesn't look at Yuji directly as he even says this. He's looking away from Yuji. Even as he talks, he's looking at other people. He says, without exception, execution sword kills anyone it house. And honestly, there's a lot of things like that, but it's not important. What's important is going when they're outside, cutting back to another scene where he says, Higuruma, do you want to die? Why are you asking? Yuji says, you can't use reverse curse technique, yet you're willing to go up against Sukuna. I've given up on the law and it's given up on me, so I want to deliver my own punishment. So I guess you're right, I'm intent on fulfilling my role and die. I get it, I'm not much different, but I kind of think you should come. Higuruma does survive all this, but he says impossible. I'm already someone who can't look you in the eye. And of course, you know what, just for the sake of glazing Higuruma, I'll include this final page where Higuruma uses domain amplification through sheer instinct of watching it from the Sukuna and Gojo fight, and Sukuna thinks, domain amplification, you didn't neutralize my technique. Less than 2 months have passed since Higuruma awakened as a sorcerer. Since then, his growth has been extraordinary, so Sukuna was fascinated by the executioner's sword shining brilliantly, brightly again, guaranteed to kill, and by the man with talent equal to Satoru Gojo. And actually, this impresses Sukuna quite a lot, with the narrator saying, recreating domain amplification. What caught Sukuna's eye was the interruption and resumption of curse technique effect due to amplification. Sukuna thinks, when I activate domain amplification against my fight with Satoru Gojo, Higuruma's sword also resumed its curse technique's effect after amplification. In other words, he wields his curse technique almost as effectively as I wield mine, as Sukuna says Hiromi Higuruma, only saying the names of people he respects. That's your name, right? And there's quite a lot more happening with the Sukuna fight, but we see that Sukuna actually chops up all of Higuruma's limbs, as Higuruma's thinking, how funny, no matter how cold my heart, no matter how prepared I was, pain still hurts, as Sukuna chops off even more limbs. Is that all you've got? Next, I'll take off your head. Reverse curse technique, you've heard of it, right? Come on, some effort please. Hurry up, heal, or die. Higuruma thinks, going back to that moment of Yuji, I'm intent on fulfilling my role and dying. My role. As Higuruma instinctively learns reverse curse technique right at that moment and tries to stab Sukuna with his executioner's sword, but gets completely baited by Sukuna, as he thinks, my role as he's dying, you've got it from here, that's what you should do. I am a sorcerer, as he passes the sword to Yuji. Of course we know he survives this, but that is Higuruma's character, and of course we know at the end of Jujutsu Kaisen, back with his assistant, he actually turns himself in. He tried to at least, but they couldn't of course, because the higher-ups have more power than the Japanese law itself, and they basically free Higuruma against his own will and just are going to use him as a sorcerer, considering he is a special grade level sorcerer. But that is the end to Higuruma's story, and especially the greatest fight in manga and anime history. Just a completely beautiful and magnificent fight, one of my favorite of all times. I just had to share this with you, that's how much I liked it. Please do leave a like on the video if you did enjoy watching, it helps out so much. Thank you very much, especially if you watched this far. A like is very much appreciated, thank you. And of course, subscribe for a ton of consistent and quality Jujutsu Kaisen content like this. I mean, hey, if you like Jujutsu Kaisen, if you like this video, you're definitely not going to regret subscribing. But hey, that's all from me, everyone. Have a wonderful day, and if you've watched this far, let me know by saying in the comments down below that you're a member of the Higuruma fan club. Yes, that is a 4-year callback. Anyone remembers that who's been watching my channel for 4 years. But have a nice day, everyone. Goodbye.